Well, Turkey has agreed to suspend its military operations in northern Syria. Under the agreement made with top U.S. officials, Ankara will halt fighting for 5 days to allow Kurdish-led forces to withdraw from their positions. Now, that deal was hammered out in Ankara by the U.S. vice president. Washington said it would impose more sanctions if Turkey failed to comply. It is unclear if the Kurds will abide by this deal. Let's get the very latest on this now with DW correspondent Julia Hahn. She's joining us from the Turkish city of Şanlıurfa. Good morning to you, Julia. How's the ceasefire holding up? What are you hearing?
Well, the Turkish government doesn't call it a ceasefire, but a pause of its military operation because it says ceasefires can only be negotiated between legitimate parties, and it doesn't consider the Kurdish forces there in Syria legitimate. It considers them terrorists. Now, we're getting fresh reports of shelling and gunfire there in the Syrian town of Resettle, which is one of the main targets of this Turkish offensive. It is unclear at the moment where these attacks are coming from. The Kurdish forces, the SDF, last night said they would respect this ceasefire, but then again, they're not an official part of this agreement, so it's unclear at the moment if they would withdraw from the area. Washington and Ankara had talked about the area along the Turkish-Syrian border extending about 30 kilometers deep into Syrian territory. That's a huge area we are talking about, so it remains to be seen how things are further developing there, but at least this could mean, hopefully, a little break for the civilians there in northern Syria after more than a week of deadly fighting.
Okay, you mentioned this huge 30 deep kilometer area. Now, it's supposed to be a safe zone that President Erdogan wants to establish in northern Syria to resettle some 1.5 million Syrian refugees now in Turkey. What does the cessation of operations mean for his strategic plan to do just that?
Well, it appears Ankara will get what it wanted there. This safe zone is part of that deal. President Erdogan says it's his master plan to resettle many, many refugees, not only here from Turkey, but from Europe as well. But there has been a lot of international criticism when it comes to this plan. And one of the major questions here is, of course, about safety. That's a question bothering many Syrian refugees living here in Turkey right now. These are the people who might be returned to such a potential safe zone. Now, not many people would openly talk to us about the situation there in Syria just because they are so scared about the general security situation there after more than 8 years of war. But we met some people who are willing to speak, and this is my report.
In the distance, Amina Mohammed can still see her homeland. Just over the horizon, the Syrian city of Kobani.
When I see Kobani, I remember my childhood, my life there. All my memories are over there.
5 years ago, militants of the so-called Islamic State laid siege to Kobani, forcing Amina and part of her family to flee to Suruç in Turkey. From here, she watches as her homeland's fate once again hangs in the balance. The Kurdish fighters, who had driven out the jihadists in 2015 after months of fierce fighting, are now on the back foot in northeast Syria in the wake of Turkey's military offensive. And there are growing concerns that IS militants could regroup.
We've heard that many IS fighters managed to escape, and that scares us. We are still afraid of the Islamists and the fighting. We have family over there, and we're worried about them.
We talked to many Syrian refugees here in the border area, and they all told us more or less the same thing: how grateful they are on the one hand that Turkey has taken them in, and how skeptical they are on the other hand that the so-called safe zone President Recep Tayyip Erdogan wants to establish in Syria will really be safe.
Abdullah Hassan's family fled to Turkey 5 years ago from Deir ez-Zor in Syria. They live in tents and try to make ends meet with odd jobs. Currently, they're helping with the cotton harvest. It's not an easy life, but it's still better than living across the border in the conflict zone, says Abdullah.
We hear they want to set up a safe zone to send back Syrians who are living in Turkey. But I don't think it will be safe. Nobody wants to go back to a place where they feel scared. If it's safe, we'll go. If not, we'll stay here.
Şanlıurfa is one of the largest cities here in the border region, with around 2 million inhabitants. Every fifth resident is a refugee from Syria. Most of the Turks we speak with support the military offensive. It's important, they say, because of the refugees and for their own safety.
The operation is a great thing. Otherwise, terrorists will turn into a big threat for us and drag our country into war.
It's their homeland, and when this area is cleared and free of terrorists, they can return.
Amina Mohammed, who fled Kobani with her family, is not that optimistic. She would rather stay here in Turkey. It's hard to see a future for her children, she says, in the images coming out of Syria.
Julia, you've been out talking to so many people. How's the ceasefire deal being perceived in Turkey?
Well, here in Turkey, it's now being perceived as a victory. It appears the Turkish government has achieved most of its military objectives. Last night, for example, the hashtag Türkiye kazanacak, which means Turkey will win, was trending on Twitter. But on the other side, there are, of course, many criticisms now towards the Trump administration. Many people say now he's basically given Turkey green light to extend its border into Syria, and they say he has betrayed the Kurdish fighters there, who were the US's most important allies in the fight against the so-called Islamic State. He betrayed them for a second time. Where there are winners, there are losers, and the losers here, as it seems, will be the Kurdish-led forces, the Kurdish population in the area. The Kurdish-led forces will have to give up a huge piece of territory, piece of land there, if everything proceeds according to what Ankara and Washington have agreed on.
Julia Hahn, thanks so much for bringing us up to date on the latest on the situation.